When the war broke out in Gaza, the world was once again speaking about the long-standing conflict in the Middle East. Many wondered if the Middle East is on the verge of war. The conflict amongst Middle Eastern nations goes back decades. But to cut the long story short, what were once clear blocs or alliances between the Arabs, Emiratis on the one hand and the Qataris, Turks and even Iran on the other hand, may be changing and for the better. In the UAE, Prime Minister Narendra Modi will be inaugurating the BAPS Mandir in Abu Dhabi tomorrow, which in itself is a significant development. But hours before the inauguration, the World Governments Summit is set to take place, and the three guests of honor are India, Turkey and Qatar, an absolutely unusual trio of nations if developments in the past few years are to be kept in mind. Sharing the stage with Prime Minister Modi will be Turkish President Erdogan, who, if you remember, made a speech against India at the UN, and Qatar's Prime Minister Sheikh Mohammed Al Thani. So when the Prime Minister of India decides to visit the UAE right before the Lok Sabha elections, there is much to think about and understand. The visit of the Prime Minister comes a day after a major diplomatic win and gesture by Qatar, which released our 8 Navy veterans who were earlier on the death sentence. The UAE, with a nearly 38% Indian population, will be opening the doors to its first Hindu temple, and the inauguration of this grand gesture will be by Prime Minister of India. Qatar and Turkey, close allies of Iran and thus by virtue of association adversaries of the Arabs and Emiratis, will both be present at the World Government Summit once again with India. So despite the war in Gaza, which put the long-standing tensions and conflict in the Middle East on the front burner once again, is the Middle East changing? Few years ago, Saudi's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman had said that the new Europe is the Middle East, and the next global renaissance will be in the Middle East. The region has massive potential. It accounts for 36% of the world's oil production, 46% of the world's oil exports, 22% of the natural gas output, and 30% of the LNG exports. It has vast reserves with 52% of the world's total oil and 43% of the world's gas. Recent disruptions in the region have once again highlighted its geographical importance as it connects Europe, Africa and Asia. Nearly 30% of the world's shipping containers pass through the Suez Canal in Egypt, while 16% of the air cargo flies through Gulf airports. So where does the Middle East look as it hopes to usher in a new chapter in its growth, which is focused more on economics rather than radicalization and other such ideologies? Interestingly, Middle Eastern exports to China and India have climbed from 5% to 26% in the past 30 years, and the share of Europe and America has fallen to 16%. So if, despite the odds and the long history of conflict, Middle Eastern nations are finally looking east and hoping to establish strong bilateral ties, a highly divided Islamic world is then rolling out the red carpet for India. This brings us to the most crucial question of all. What is the role that India needs to play in a changing Middle East? We take this conversation forward. I have with me Ambassador Bhaswati Mukherjee. We also have with us Major General Gigi Dwivedi, and I have with me Pathikrit Pain as well. Let me begin with Ambassador Mukherjee. Ambassador Mukherjee, I tried to the best of my ability to summarize for our viewers what really is or the Middle East has been all about, and how there is now been a change from the leadership of Middle Eastern nations from within, wanting to change that perspective and that narrative about the region and about the countries and what they stand for. Given that that change is now here, ma'am, I'd like to begin by understanding your perspective. What do you feel is the larger role that India needs to play as maybe even a stabilizing factor in the region?
Well, you summarized it very well, Devika, if I may say so. My own comments are the following. First of all, you rightly said it's a highly divided Middle East because there is a Shia-Sunni divide, which is very accentuated and which unfortunately plays a negative role in the politics of the region. There is turmoil in the Gaza Strip, and it has actually caused a huge impediment to a peace process. When we were going forward with our G20 summit, it appeared that we were also going to have an India, Middle East, Europe corridor. We were going to have free trade flows, etc. And all this has received a severe setback because of what is happening in the Gaza Strip as a result of the Hamas attack on Israel and Israel's military actions thereafter. However, what is important is that there is now a recognition and an understanding that India plays a role in the Middle East which is accepted by all, including across the Shia-Sunni divide, including by countries which earlier had certain positions which were not very friendly to India, but which are totally different now. That includes Qatar, with whom we have actually concluded a huge deal last week at the India Energy Week, which is going to give India energy security for the next 50 years. These are very, very big developments. I'm not sure whether the next renaissance or the next area of importance is the Middle East. In my opinion, that power has already shifted to Asia. It is in Asia that the power politics have shifted. It's in Asia where the economic transformation is taking place. And it's in Asia where we would see how Asians handle the new great game. But that being said, the Middle East is a very important partner for India, and the fact that, as you rightly pointed out, the red carpet has been rolled out for Prime Minister Modi, the fact that there is this huge temple that has been built in the United Arab Emirates, the fact that our Navy veterans have been released, these are all very, very important gestures coming from different parts of the Middle East, like parts of a mosaic that fit together, all in all saying, India, we welcome you, we welcome your role, which, Devika, let me tell you, 20 years ago, when you had a hostile OIC under the control of Pakistan, continuously interfering in India's internal affairs, continuously passing resolutions very critical of Kashmir, etc., that time has gone, and clearly now the Middle East and India can form those partnerships, transformative partnerships in this century. Devika.
Right, absolutely. Ambassador, I'll come to you in just a moment. Let me bring in Major General Gigi Dwivedi into the conversation as well. Major Dwivedi, your perspective on the same as well, sir. When we talk about the Middle East rolling out the red carpet for India, several nations, we've seen a grand gesture by Qatar, sir, just the day before yesterday with the release of the 8 Navy veterans who were earlier on the death sentence. It's been a big diplomatic victory for India to have that issue sorted. We now see, of course, a temple being inaugurated in the UAE, which is again a big gesture and signaling to India that we respect the Indian community and its efforts. We respect the Hindu community and its efforts in our country, and we're finally acknowledging the fact that Hinduism is perhaps is the third largest religion, but we are also now perhaps acknowledging that fact and ensuring that there is a place of worship. And of course, like I said, the World Government Summit, which will take place tomorrow, where India will be sharing the stage with Qatar, with a Turkey that has not had too many great things to say about India. If there is a shift, sir, what role do you feel India then needs to play?
Well, Devika, I think you had very rightly brought out one very important facet, that where does Middle East sits in as far as the geostrategic configuration is concerned. Well, I am a student of West Asia, and we term Middle East more as West Asia and teach the subject. So I like to put 3-4 important issues which you have flagged in the perspective. First and foremost, West Asia per se as you rightly said, sits between the three continents, that is Africa, Asia, and Europe. And the next century is not going to be the Asian century alone. It's going to be the Afro-Asian century, where West Asia has a great role to play. Second point is that as far as India is concerned, West Asia is a Western extended neighborhood. When we look at East, we have the ASEAN. In the West, we have the West Asia. And West Asia is important for India from number of factors. First and foremost, India today is in position to rebalance West Asia because somehow West Asia was always more centric to initially Europe and then to China. It's here India can play a very major role as far as geopolitical rebalancing is concerned. Second is that today, as the reconfiguration of West Asia is taking place, new alignment, Iran, Turkey one side, but we have UAE, Israel, I2U2, in which India, Israel, UAE, and US are in the partnership or in the new grouping. So therefore, India again figures very centrally in West Asia. Third important point is India has very good relation with the typical adversaries, let's say Saudi Arabia or Iran. We have good relation with both. We have excellent relation with the GCC countries, the Gulf Cooperation Council, where we have a trade something to the tune of $240 billion. The fourth point is that new supply chains that are emerging, where IMEC, that is India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor, will be actually realigning the supply chains which are more today centric to the China. And the new, the sea line of communication, as far as Indo-Pacific is concerned, again, West Asia figures very prominently, and today the route through that sea is under stress, but the almost 20% of the trade passes through the Red Sea. And how India can play the fifth very important role is human resource development, education, where as it is, where IIT is being set up in Abu Dhabi, then the technology, digital, financial institutions, and last but not the least, I think that we are a stabilizing factor and we can bring in a lot of value in the governance of the region because the whole region is going to gradually wean away from the oil economy to the more financial and diversified economies. Devika.
Absolutely. Pathikrit, let me bring you into the conversation as well. I'd just like to understand from your perspective as well, on the same note, Pathikrit, what role do you feel that India can then perhaps play in a changing Middle East, which is also, as I've said, now looking east itself, with a reduction in the role of, say, in America in the past few decades. We've seen what's happening in Europe as well, where European economies themselves are truly now struggling at this point in time. When the countries in other regions then look elsewhere, we have in a way, Pathikrit, become organically we've become partners. We were having this discussion earlier as well about how there has been some sense of a natural partnership that has emerged from the current conditions in geopolitics. But now that those, now that the table has been set, how does one take it forward from here?
Devika, good evening, and good evening to all my fellow panelists. Number one, see, I still believe that there would be other players who would still play a role in Middle East. So it's not that India alone would be there. So US and China will continue to do whatever they want to do and whatever they wish to do. But I think there is a close affinity, and there is a remarkable appreciation today in Middle East about India. And the most important reason for that appreciation is because we do not interfere in the internal affairs of other countries. I think many of the Middle Eastern countries are today fed up with the Western interference for a long time into their internal affairs. There has been efforts of regime change which they are fed up with. For a long time, Middle East was a theater of conflict between the Cold War rivals. And I think India is like the breath of fresh air for them. India is also a country which is teaching to the rest of the world that relationships can be decoupled. You need not be on one side and consider the other side as adversary all the time. India has emerged as a resilient and a stable partner, and most importantly, the relationship is evolving from an era of buyer and seller to one of shared partnership and shared development. I think, as was mentioned before, India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor is one aspect of it. The other is in many areas, India is coming up with a large number of technological innovations, which I think countries of Middle East can find very productive for them. And let me also tell you, many of these Middle Eastern countries, in spite of the large repository of natural gas or other energy resources that they have, as the world is moving towards a carbon-free or a green energy transition that we're witnessing, countries are also trying to reduce their dependence on fossil fuel as part of their economy. You see the way the transformation has been brought about in the Middle East by the government that we have over there. The transformation that we see that is happening in Middle East, especially in Saudi Arab. So, and as you have mentioned, what is happening in Abu Dhabi, United Arab Emirates. So there is today a remarkable change in terms of embracing and accepting the Indian diversity, the Indian concerns, the Indian views, and the Indian ethos. And a significant part of the credit goes to Prime Minister Modi and his diplomacy in the last 10 years, because even 10 years back, most of these Middle Eastern countries were extremely pro-Pakistan. Whether we like it or not, it was like that only. Dubai was known for underworld. Today it is not, because in the last few years, a large number of elements who have been involved in nefarious activities in India and were residing in fled to Dubai. They have been extradited by the government of UAE, and in many other areas we see collaborations happening. So I think there is a remarkable change that is coming. But let me tell you, India would continue to play a role of non-interference. Yes, it doesn't also mean, Devika, that the rivalry and the face-off that exists between the three blocs, that is the Arab bloc led by Saudi Arab, the Turkey, which is a remnant of the Ottoman Empire and trying to revive the whole thing in Middle East, as well as sectarian rivalry that exists with Iran as a Shia majority country. These things are not going to change. But I think India has found the finish, and a lot of credit for that goes to Indian diplomacy in terms of ensuring that we do not get involved in the internal challenges and the internal conflicts that they have with each other. I think that is a great thing. And I think over a period of time, India's economic heft is also playing a critical role. Ambassador Mukherjee rightly mentioned about the $78 billion deal that we had last week with Qatar. It is something too big for a country like Qatar to ignore. So as you become far more resilient economically, you become a bigger economy, and along with your ethos, we do not want to behave like many of the European countries in terms of, using human rights as a weapon to interfere. So I think there is a value, there's a respect for India's leadership, India's philosophy, India's ethos, and last but not the least, India's remarkable transformation over the last 20, 30 years, or from a time when we were on the verge of bankruptcy to emerging as the fifth largest economy of the world. That specific transformation also is critical from the perspective that in 2013, we were among the fragile 5 economies of the world, and today we are among the major 5. So that respect is invariably there. But, ultimately everything has a face, and bringing everything together, India's military, might at the same time, India's military, restrained approach, India's economic progress, India's innovation, India's culture, and India's non-interfering foreign policy. I think everything together, it has been wonderfully put forward by Prime Minister Modi. And that's the reason you see today, the Middle East is far more open to understanding Indian concerns and views, which probably 10 years back was not evident. But I reiterate, India would continue to play a role, maybe a mediator at times, but it would continue to play a role of non-interference. We are not going to replace what the West did for a long time in terms of creating conflicts. We would rather prefer. Prime Minister Modi said this is not an era of war, and Middle East for a long time has been fed up with wars of different kinds. So I think we are putting forward a new proposition as a voice of the global South, and I think there's a better acceptance of India today than what was there in the past. I think everybody has to go along. Yes, we have to see how it works, but Prime Minister Modi in the last 10 years has given a wonderful direction to the relationship between India and Middle East. Back to you, Devi.
Okay, Master Mukherjee, taking that thought forward, when we talk about the extending role of India in the Middle East, at the same time, ma'am, countries, like I said, like America, they do have legacy issues. America is the one that has been at the center of several wars that the region has seen in the past few decades. So when the role of an America recedes, is there then a vacuum created for anyone to take that place, or has the world changed now entirely and most of the nations are now focused on establishing more of bilateral relations and ensuring that their bilateral relations with nations are on point, rather than focusing on building larger blocs, larger alliances with a few linchpin countries?
I don't see India at this moment having enough economic clout or political clout to take over what you say is the declining influence of United States in the region. In fact, I don't see the declining influence of United States in the region at all. In the G20 summit that we had, in fact, with the support of the Americans, we brought about this amazing deal, which is still to take off, unfortunately, on the India, Middle East, Europe corridor. And India is in a close strategic partnership with the United States. When China was rising and China had a moderate leadership, China's moderate leadership said, first make China an economic giant and everything else follows. The same applies to India. We have to first become an economic giant. And we've already done so, as Pathik said, from being fragile 5 to top 5, we will become in the top 3. When you reach that stage, exactly like the deal, the RAS-GAS deal we did in Goa last week, we become too big to ignore. We become too big to insult. We become too big not to understand and appreciate our perspective in the world. That is why it is important not to have a declining United States, but a United States that takes its responsibilities in the region much more seriously than when it ran away from Afghanistan, leaving the Taliban to take over. That was a horrendous example, and it was followed by the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So when a great power does not take its responsibilities, it does not mean that emerging powers will automatically take their place. Great powers must take their responsibilities, while other powers, emerging powers, automatically rise to the position that was denied to them because of 180 years of colonial rule. So to answer your question, we are not there to take America's place. We are there to take our legitimate place at the high table and in the Middle East, where for decades we were ignored. We were never part of any talks. We were never even considered to be a reliable partner to be included in any serious discussion on the Middle East. That has changed. And this Global Governance Summit is an example of how much India's position has changed in the world order, including in the Middle East. Devika.
Right, absolutely. Major General G.G. Vivedi, I'd like to bring you back into the conversation, sir. Today, when the Prime Minister was sharing the dais with the President of the UAE, one major aspect that he focused on was fintech. It was just a 4-minute clip that was released of the PM on what he said, and in those 4 minutes he of course thanked him about the mandir that will be inaugurated tomorrow, but he also briefly touched upon the fact that the fintech relations between India and the UAE are probably going to be the backbone of our future relations. I'd just like to understand from you, sir, other than that, what do you feel then will be some of the crucial and key areas of India-UAE relations going ahead?
Well, Devika, first point is that we have talked about the America's rebalancing. In fact, in 2010, President Obama had stated that America will be rebalancing toward the Western Pacific because Chinese influence in the South China East China Sea. Now, when the rebalancing takes place, you have to fill the vacuum. And America did indicate that India has a great role to play. And that's why the whole concept of Indo-Pacific came into being. And lately we had the I2U2, that means the Israel, India, US and United UAE. So therefore, America is keen that India plays a larger role in this region and in Asia Pacific. That is, I think, fundamentally in the interest of both India as well as America and the larger part of the region. Second point is that you brought out the relationship between India and UAE. We have to see the West Asia in the larger game plan of the emerging rebalancing that is taking place toward Asia. Again, India is seen as a major player because of three important areas. One is, of course, our economic strength that is growing, and that is will keep growing. Secondly, the role India is playing as far as the security of the region is concerned. Today, we have about 21 naval ships which are in this region and providing security in the Red Sea and the area around. And thirdly, India is emerging as a major manufacturer of defense equipment, and that's where India again will play a major role. And we had our cooperation, and the more cooperation will be there in manufacturing of the weapon systems, in the cyberspace, in the aerospace. All these areas are very, very happening, and these are the areas of the future. So therefore, if I summarize, that India will have a multiple role: geopolitical, geoeconomics, strategic, and defense cooperation. All these will put together will make India a major player, and that's what suits the Americans. They are very keen on the IMEC actually being taken forward. So also the Europe, and this well serves the larger interest of Indo-Pacific, where West Asia is a major player, and India has a dynamic role to play, which will increase with the passage of time.
Right, absolutely. I thank all of our guests for joining us on the broadcast.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.